Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by a team of experts. And joining me today is Dave Forde, Chartered Construction Manager and Consultant. Welcome, Dave.
Hello.
Good to have you back. And Ryan Hughes, founder of the Mystery Investor brand, buy-to-let specialist. Welcome to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Stephen.
Good. Well, we'll crack straight on. And just before I ask you your first question, Dave, we're coming towards the end of the year and looking towards a good future next year. I wonder what your view is of the construction industry for the coming year, because we get a lot of talk about these new green innovations for construction. We talk about modular construction. Is the whole thing changing? I just wondered what your view was. Are we actually better to stick to something a bit more conventional and take things very slow on this path, or are you imagining that we're going to see rapid changes in the way construction works?
I think we're going to see rapid change purely because the government has dictated this is what's going to happen. They talk about their, I don't know what they call it, their net zero 2030, 2050 or whatever. So we will see increasing use of modern methods of construction, not just for the green advantages of it, just because purely they're just better, they're more efficient, they're quicker. The cost has come down to the same as traditional build now.
That's it.
So we will see that. And a lot of this retrofitting that is planned, it's been worked out that it'd be quicker, easier and cheaper to just demolish places and build new ones rather than trying to retrofit the old stock.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I know years ago we've been used to having sort of properties lasting 100 years, haven't we? I mean, here in Docklands, I've had conversations where, you know, people have been looking at buying 20-year-old buildings and demolishing them because they didn't go high enough in those days and whatever. So it's cheaper just to buy, demolish, take the site value and build up again. Quite a complex issue, isn't it? Are you hopeful for the industry?
Definitely, yeah. It's been a rocky few years after the COVID and the supply chain issues, but I know house building has gone down a bit, but that's affected by interest rates, mortgages, etc. No, the industry is thriving. There's work everywhere, all over the country. I think 2024 is looking good.
Okay, well, on that super optimistic note, here's your first question. With construction material costs rising so steeply and so quickly, how does one get surety of price when commissioning building works? And how are the construction firms seeking to secure their position on pricing? So it's a double-edged sword, that, isn't it?
It's really hard for a client to get surety of pricing. I mean, a lot of firms, they're giving quotes that are valid for 7 days now and things like that. I mean, there's several ways you can do it. You could, if you can find a contractor to agree to a fixed price contract that they're going to honour, don't forget they're building in what they think could potentially be the rises in the future. You can go open book, which is, if people don't know what that is, I'll quickly explain. So the client and the contractor will agree a profit margin for the contractor. Let's just say it's 15%, and the builder will be open with everything he buys. He'll show the client, and then he'll put his 15% profit on it.
Got it. Okay.
You know, but a model that I'm seeing increasingly is the one where people go labour only, and they engage one of these companies, these procurement companies that deliver absolutely everything for the project. And the difference with them is they honour their price. So you agree a price with them today, you're not starting for 3 months, they will honour that price.
Presumably they buy it in anticipation.
They're buying in massive bulk, huge, you know what I mean? And that's all built into their price, but that's a very cost effective way. That is, if you want surety, that's the only way I know of getting surety.
I mean, down here, a couple of the very big, substantial builders that have got sort of £1 billion developments down here, they've actually stopped work, and so they're not going to recommence for a couple of years because they want prices to settle Because when you get halfway up in a £500 million building or £1 billion building, it's a bit difficult to say, put the stops on it, isn't it, really?
Well, when we talk about these big contractors, what they're doing when you get to that end of the industry, it's completely ruthless. Now, I don't know if you're allowed to mention companies on this program, so I won't. But one of the biggest in the country recently said that all their supply chain have to take a 10% cut in all the profits that have already, contracts that have already been agreed. So, if you've agreed £1 million to supply and fit this stuff, you got to now go back, it's 900 grand. And with them, it's just take it or leave it, So that's how the big boys deal with things.
Right. And have you learned a lesson from that?
I've been around it most of my life, mate. Yeah. It's not
pleasant, is it?
Faint-hearted, no.
No. Okay. All right, Ryan. Now to the tame world of renting. So, Ryan, with the new legislation affecting no-fault evictions, how do the panel think this will change the face of the rental industry? I mean, we were talking off camera about going back to just trying to think now, late 80s, I guess. From the 60s to the 80s, when we had people like Rackman who were adept at getting people out of fixed tenancies by whatever means were necessary. It was. I think you've mentioned in the show before, a bit like the Wild West. It really was then, certainly in London. And then Margaret Thatcher brought in the assured short-hold tenancies, which gave the landlord an assured period, gave the tenant an assured period. In other words, the landlord knew exactly, without any fuss, when he could get his property back. Yeah. And that brought a lot of people into the rental market, and it saved the day in terms of housing stock, didn't it?
Yeah.
But where are we going with what's happening now? I think it's going into reverse.
It's very much going into reverse, and people that own these assets are losing control of their assets. Without people policing it correctly, they're letting people build up rent arrears in massive amounts because we know the house builders have slowed down. There's not enough houses for them to go into. So they're just saying, well, just stay up there and, build the rent arrears up. But they're not supporting the landlord with the rent arrears or the mortgage payments. I suppose it starts when you're taking that tenant on initially, that you have a very good, transparent relationship with them. I've spoke about it previously where even if you do have a lettings and management company, you are still a point of contact for them to make sure if people lose their jobs or circumstance change where they can't afford the rent, where you come to some sort of agreement rather than, all of a sudden they've gone into rent arrears and you just want your property back. The landlords need some support. It's a very much, here's the tenant, this is the changes. We've already seen them change on they've changed on the standards that the tenants can live in by backing off from the money put into the properties to make them a higher standard. They've now said, well, actually, you don't need to do that now. But actually, you potentially can't get your property back.
Yeah,
exactly. It's taken away from the tenants and then taken away from the landlords rather than working together.
But I mean, if you listen to the government, they will tell you that they would prefer to see a lot more institutional landlords. I mean, I can think of one great big department store, for instance, that's gone into buy to let, with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of properties. Now, all that's all right. That's really being done at the cost of the small landlord, what the government would call an accidental landlord, the person perhaps inherits a property that they want to rent, or they just got one or two or three. But the real problem with that is that I can see that you're going to get two or three either insurance companies or credit checking agencies controlling the tenant's ability to be able to rent, because it'll be a very limited number of people acting for a very limited number of big landlords. And it takes away the opportunity for the tenant and the landlord to have a chat and say, well, look, okay, I'm a bit nervous about it. You don't seem to be ever so well off, but I'll tell you what we can do. Why don't you give me, an extra bit of deposit, or why don't you pay a bit more up front? And, we do a deal. That's going to go out of the window, isn't it, with institutional letting?
It's definitely going to go out the window. as we know, buy to let is a business in itself, but we're talking about taking it to a really corporate structure of you never really speak to the landlord, you've got no control with the landlord. I believe it'll work effectively with apartment blocks. You have that point of contact, and you've got 200 units in a row, or 100 units in a row. That's easy to manage, and you've got your point of contact. Where it changes, and the numbers that some of the big institutes are talking about acquiring, they're going to have to look at houses. And when they bring houses rather than apartments or flats into the equation, that's a different ball game altogether, because of predominantly gas boilers, whether they change to electric or not, but majority are gas and will be for a long time. Gas safety on top of that, access to it. You don't just have a master key to a row of houses.
No.
You know, in apartment blocks, it's a lot more easy to manage, but that control is going to be lost in terms of when they want to acquire the numbers. It'll be interesting to see how they play out acquiring the numbers that in order they want to, because presumably they're not going to be using all the cash reserves because they want really high numbers. So there will be some finance involved, which we know a lot of landlords are at the moment financed, so they're selling up, but control wise, they'll be on the same basis. So I think it's going to be many, many years to some of these institutional companies that think they're entering the market aren't going to get anywhere near the numbers that they're banking on. Certainly for the next 5 years.
And I don't think this sometimes appreciating the complexities. I mean, I live in a block, well, there's 2 blocks where I live, 600 apartments. I mean, you have a simple thing like fire door checks. It takes 6 months to do it because you're writing round the world to try and get access to the apartment, to get the keys, to have the authority to do it. And just a simple check like that, as I say, can take 6 months or more.
Yeah.
If in fact you do them all, which often you don't.
And again, it's who's controlling it. And when the landlord licensing in certain areas, we've seen how effective it has been for both the tenant and landlord, because when the tenant's in a better condition property, they're paying more rent.
Sure.
When the landlord's got a better condition property, it's worth more money. So we've seen how effective the landlord licensing is. When you're talking about the scale of some of these companies, we've seen reports of 10 to 15,000 units that they want to acquire through various, some banks, some shopping retail giants. They've got to go to the housing, and it's going to be very difficult to manage, even whether it's apartments, just the checks. I don't believe, like yourself, they've got the infrastructure or they know what they're in for. It's completely different to commercial. A lot of them come from a bit of commercial, whether it's the banks, they've had a lot of commercial leases, whether it's retailers, they've had commercial units on retail parts. Different ball game.
Okay, thanks for that, Ryan. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when we'll be asking Dave and Ryan more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Dave Forde and Ryan Hughes. Welcome back. Do the panel think that the ever-increasing costs of construction are likely to cause further shortages in housing stock and drive up prices even further?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the main reasons that there's been a slowdown in house building at the moment, it's just not worth it with end values and build cost. Developers are just saying, well, it's not worth our while.
Well, you've got costs going like that and end value going like that.
Exactly. And also you've got the thing about the mortgage affordability, that people can't get mortgages. So it's obvious if costs go up, this house building will go down. So I don't know where Keir Starmer gets this thing about he's going to build 300,000 houses a year, because we can't build what we're trying to build at the moment. But the only way forward is if we use modern methods of construction, because the prices of them, they're not subject to such volatile spikes and falls, etc. And the build cost of them has now come down to the same, if not perhaps slightly less than traditional build.
I see. Okay, but do you know, it's always been a puzzle to me ever since the Cameron Osborne days, and Starmer's carrying it on now. Oh, we're going to build 300. Who's we?
Yeah.
Who's we? I mean, my view is that actually, if a builder, a constructor, a developer can know that he can sell the product at the end, which comes to your mortgage point, he'll build as many houses as you want. You know, we'll be inundated with them. You know.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it's very difficult for young people to get on the housing ladder these days. You need horrendously big deposits. The rates, although, you know, perhaps you'll remember too, Dave, he won't, but you will, you know, 10, 12, 15% mortgages, you know, so actually 5% to me sounds pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But to somebody who has had 3 or 4 years on 0%, it sounds horrendous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the key to getting these places built. It's nothing to do with awkward planning decisions. It's nothing to do with construction costs. It's to do with affordability at the end, is it not? I mean, that's my view. And if you say, you know, that some of these new innovations, like sort of component building, if you like, if they can help, great. And maybe it's the costs are marginally coming down in that area. I mean, anything that's new tends to be expensive, doesn't it? And then it settles itself down.
Yeah.
Am I on the right track?
Yeah, without a doubt, yeah.
Okay. What do you think to that, Ryan?
I think there's not enough support for the builders, the house builders, in terms of the prices, the affordability. We know the rates are high, but not obviously to what people have seen in the past. They look not normal to some people, but people haven't been prepared for that. I come from a generation of, you know, push yourself to the limit, you know, get that house that's more expensive. It's going to grow in value. And then all of a sudden you go, well, actually, my mortgage has gone up £400, but I've gone to my limit of what my mortgage is. And now we're seeing, we're surrounded up north with X amount is affordable housing. Affordable housing is more expensive than the majority of the area. It's affordable housing compared to that site. And the rates on it are so much more expensive for the actual price, whether that's down to building costs, whether that's down to margins that people now want to make on the site or make up from building that they've not done. Some of the projects that I've seen are really, really expensive compared to the local area that they've been built in on that piece of land. But they go, well, we've got affordable housing on it. Part of the agreement was, well, we have X amount of affordable housing compared to the price of the site, not the price of the area, which is completely different. We've seen it with apartments that average price area might be 200, 250,000. The apartments that they're trying to sell are 400. Affordable is 325, 350. There's no real assistance with it.
I again, when you have this term affordable housing, affordable to who?
Yeah,
and affordable
exactly.
to what area?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a sort of one size fits all, is it?
Well, it should go on average price of the area, not on the development.
Yeah.
Because you can set, well, we want £500,000 for this apartment, but we'll do apartments at 400 and say they're affordable in comparison to the scheme, not in comparison with the area.
Difficult subject. Okay, Ryan, your question. The government seems intent on driving the small buy-to-let investor out of the market with new legislation, tax impositions and more, in favour of larger institutional landlords. What do the panel think of these policies? I mean, we've touched on this earlier, but I mean, I'm at a loss with what they're trying to do at the moment.
Again, we talk about support, we talk about landlord licensing. If they want control of the market, yes, you know, people setting limited companies up, it's a great way for landlords to structure the business, to see what assets they've actually got in one place and rent coming into that account. Whether it's difficult, because I'm for putting it into a limited company and offering that transparency. And we know it's easier to dispose of once you get a bit of structure behind it. they are getting rid of a lot of the singular landlords, the ones that start building a portfolio. And some people, that's their limit, that's what they can afford. We seen it 4 or 5 years ago, where a lot of people just started cashing the pensions in because they wasn't getting a return, and what they did was they just bought one property with that money that they'd cashed out on. They're the ones that are potentially being penalised now because there's no real benefit for it. And then it's the same with the people exiting the market because of the energy. Should they now sell it? Should they have took that money out of the pension? The market's so up and down without any clear direction of the objectives of it, of landlords and tenants working together, guided by the government, benefiting both parties, because we know how important the private rented sector is to the UK economy.
But you see, what I can't understand is that, the government, for instance, again in this new legislation, are talking about having a national register of landlords. Okay, lovely, great idea. Well, look what happened when we had COVID and we were going to have a national register of people who got COVID with that app. How many billion was it they spent on it? And it never worked for a day, did it? So I worry about the government stepping in here and handling that. So, okay, then switch it to the local authority. I can't understand why a local authority couldn't treat it as an opportunity. So you set up a new division, you have a number of inspectors, you've got to register to be a landlord, a little bit like your Confederation of Builders. So he has to register, he has to show that the property is decent to an inspector, he has to show that he can pay the rates and the associated costs of being a landlord. And he pays a fee for that inspection to go on and to be included on the register. Now that way it would kind of be enforceable, because somebody would have a rental complaint and they go to the council, not registered, right, bosh. You hung out to dry, aren't you? Yeah. So it could all be opportunity. It's a little bit like the sellers pack that we had. I can't remember now. Is it 15 years ago? Ryan, I don't know. Can you remember? Do you remember those?
I was still on the building site then.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, we had these sellers packs, which, because a lot of people were putting their property on the market to see if they could get a price, wasting everybody's time, people incurring costs, and then say, actually, I'm not selling, that sort of thing. So the idea was that people paid a fee, which I think was 500 quid or whatever it was. You had to supply the searches, the photos, the deeds, everything else, and it cost you 500 quid to do that with your agent. The agent was obliged to do that, couldn't market the property without it. So many thousands of businesses were set up at the encouragement of government across the country, people setting up to do it, self-employed, right. Yes, go for it, we're behind you. And then what did the government do? We've changed our mind, actually, we've scrapped it. But you see, I think something like that again for the housing market, something similar for the rental market, would actually do a lot of good.
I think it's all down.
Lecture over.
I think it's all to do with who's going to police it, who's going to enforce it.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned, we've seen some areas with the HMO licensing, they're improving the standards of that area, whether it's down to local authorities to do it themselves, and all of a sudden you've got landlords piling into one area because you need a landlord licensing, but rental's so strong because you've got a landlord license, and that means your property's in good condition. There's areas in Manchester you can cross over the road and you don't need a HMO license.
Right.
So everyone crosses over the road and left to do to their own devices again.
See, I think it'd be great to have a sort of almost a kite mark for a rental property. Yes, it's approved, it's legal, it's safe, it's genuine.
You can, a gas engineer can't sign off a boiler without a gas safety certificate. You can't rent the property out, but the person that owns that property isn't encouraged to make improvements to the property. There's no benefit, there's been really good times in the market and everyone's entered it.
Yeah.
And with support, people can grow and help, not only with, the rate that houses are being built at, but more people, private landlords, buying these properties for people to, if we can assist from both sides.
Yeah, sure.
And encourage the individual private landlord, because we've seen Northwest, but across the country, how many vacant properties there are, commercial spaces coming up every single day now from people moving online, but there's no there's no benefit to the private landlord to go, I'll do that development and create this many houses. There's no offset for it. They're getting taxed at every step of it.
See how easy your industry is, Dave? What a nice life you've got. Okay. Dave Forde, Chartered Construction Manager and Consultant, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Great information from you as ever. Ryan Hughes, Mr. Investor himself, buy-to-let expert, thank you very much for your input today. Really good and useful information. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time on Property Questions.